Joan of Arc was a real person who lived a short but eventful life from about 1412 to her death at the age of 19 when she was burned at the stake in Rouen on May 30th, 1431. She was an illiterate girl who said she heard and saw visions of the Archangel Michael at the age of 12 that inspired her to lead an army against England and its Burgundian allies to defend the French monarchy. She was called a visionary, a heretic, a sorceress, a witch, a cross-dresser, and much more. Her public execution was horrific, and her remains were tossed into the Seine River. Joan of Arc was beatified in 1909 and canonized as a saint in 1920. She was a woman for all media and became appealing as a symbol, as a heroine, as an icon to Christians, to freedom fighters, to feminists, to all kinds of people who felt that they were marginalized in one way or another. And her life, or what we perceive of as her life, became profoundly important source material for every kind of creative artist. The problem in telling the story of Joan of Arc is that even though she only lived 19 years, her life was incredibly eventful. And because it was the early 15th century, the source material is not reliable. There are a few letters, there are paintings, there are accounts that are told about Joan's life, but she's become a myth. She was multimedia well before multimedia existed. The only painting done of her in her lifetime was destroyed, but we have paintings done by people who saw those paintings, and that's as close as we get. We have accounts from church figures, we have accounts from kings of France, we have accounts from the British. All of them tell a very different story. The fact that Joan, to lead the French army dressed as a man, was considered by some people noble, by other people heretical. So the thing about Joan of Arc is that she's amazingly polarizing. And when you take her story and put it in a different form, whether it's an opera, a play, an oratorio, a film, what it becomes is the creator's version of what Joan of Arc represents to him or her. Verdi saw her as a noble figure. And Verdi in the 1840s wrote operas that tried to inspire Italians to throw off the yoke of foreign domination. So to have a figure such as a young woman leading the battle, leading the charge against foreign occupiers, in Joan's case it was the British, was a perfect surrogate for Italian audiences in Milan who were under the domination of Austria. Tchaikovsky did another very famous version of The Maid of Orleans, the Schiller play. It was his 6th of his 11th operas. It came right after Eugene Onegin and came in 1878, 1879, at a time when there were struggles with the royal family in St. Petersburg, in which the serfs demanded to be set free. It was a very powerful work and a very powerful concept for those who embraced it. Tchaikovsky himself wrote the libretto. The work that we're going to see at the New York Philharmonic, Jeanne d'Arc au Bûcher, Joan of Arc at the Stake, is an oratorio by Arthur Honegger, a Swiss composer. It was commissioned by Ida Rubinstein, who is a dancer and actress. It was set to a libretto by Paul Claudel, and the work runs about 70 minutes. Claudel was a very controversial figure, and he was more famous in his time than Honegger. Claudel was perhaps France's leading playwright in the early 20th century. Some people said that he and Bertolt Brecht were the two most important European playwrights of that time. Claudel had a very strong religious conversion, and for him, Joan was a Christian figure. She was a saint. She was carrying out the visions that had been handed to her from above and doing the Lord's work. Because of his extreme devoutness, some would say too devout, Claudel was accused of anti-Semitism, and he had to really bend over backwards in World War II to convince the French that he was on their side and not on the side of the Nazis. But when this work, this oratorio, premiered in neutral Switzerland, in Basel, in 1938, it was perceived as something that was a call for peace. And what it is the story of Joan of Arc at the stake. There's a prologue, there are 11 scenes, and she looks back over her life and narrates scenes from her life. She tells some of them. We have an actress doing it, and famously in the past was Ingrid Bergman, and then Martha Keller, who did it with the New York Philharmonic, and now Marion Cotillard. You have the actress speaking certain lines. You have singers singing certain music. You have a chorus. You have the orchestra. It is, in its way, multimedia. And if you think of it that way as you listen to the performance, you'll discover that what we are perceiving are Joan's visions. But rather than seeing visions of the future, they're memories of the past. And what's so powerful about this work, and what Claudel and Honegger and Rubinstein understood, was that at this dramatic moment, at the moment of her death, as the flames lick up, as she becomes very hot, as she becomes fevered and frenzied, yes, maybe she sees visions again, but she looks back over her life, and it makes for an incredibly powerful, very singular kind of work, and in a way that the New York Philharmonic can present as theater, as music, as drama, as something much beyond. Joan of Arc was and is a person who represents everything that we see to be noble, whether we are religious, whether we are not religious, whether we believe in freedom for all, whether we want to emphasize self-assertion, self-identity. She has something for everyone, and I know she'll have something for you.